Hello and welcome to a very special edition of the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I am joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. Nate is finally released from Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The 500 is over. The same guy won.
Yep.
It
was fun though. I went down on the track to pit road for the final 2 laps, and even though you obviously only see bits and bursts of the race, like you kind of feel the whole thing because there's the announcer, there's the it's up on the video board, and you can just kind of hear the different parts of the stadium rising and lowering, and that was wild. It was crazy to just feel kind of you felt the shifts before you even knew that they happened, and one guy taking over the other, and crazy finish. And to think that like a 3-some-hour race after a 4-hour rain delay can be decided in the final like 20 seconds like that is wild.
I have a friend whose very young son is a Pato Award fan, and he was very mad at Joseph Newgarden.
Really mad. That was Pato Award. That was about one of the most emotional athletes I've seen, because he keeps coming so close and falling so short, and it's what you want though. It's what makes sports great. It ended up being a great day, even though we had to wait all day for it with that rain delay.
It did rain quite a bit.
Yeah.
That has been your preview of IndyStar's IndyCar Weekly with Nathan Brown. Just only with Nate Atkins playing the Nathan Brown role. Check out Nathan's podcast, by the way. That part's serious. The first part was a joke. That part's serious. Nobody knows more than Nathan on IndyCar. We're here though. The Colts are almost done. Like they're almost done with their portion of the offseason. We are taping this on Wednesday. I will be at their second organized team activity on Thursday, and then next week they are currently scheduled to have 3 days of mandatory minicamp, and then basically be done until training camp. So we are almost at the end. With that in mind, Nate put out the call for mailbag questions. I'm going to let Nate throw out the questions for us. We're going to try to go through these fairly rapid fire, I guess, depending on the question. So Nate, what do we got for our first question?
Yeah, so I guess I go in a few different directions here, but I'll go with one that I'll just start out with the one I think is the most discussion based. Comes from Patrick on Twitter. And Patrick asks, other than Anthony Richardson, what would be the absolute doomsday season-ending injury for the Colts 2024 season? It's been a little front of mind to me because I'm putting together a list right now of the most essential Colts, which I rank every summer. Some of that's about what they can do on the high end with their ceiling, but a lot of it's based on how problematic would it be to lose this player for a long period of time. So I have an idea of that, but I want to hear your answer first. So outside of Anthony Richardson, what season-ending injury would kill the Colts the most?
This is Nate's chance to get back at me for doing this to him all the time, where you're not super prepared for it while the other person is. I think I might go Michael Pittman Jr. I want to go Jonathan Taylor, because I think he takes the running game to such another level. But I think that you could probably. I don't like the Colts backup running backs right now. Just from I don't think there's somebody who can step in and do what Zach Moss did last year. But I think that there's a version in a hypothetical world where Taylor is hurt and Anthony Richardson is healthy. You can. There's probably a quarterback centric version of the rush offense that works pretty well. They lose Michael Pittman. I know everybody's really high on A.D. Mitchell right now. He's a rookie. He's a second-round pick. He's somewhat raw coming out. I'm not counting him as like a superstar right away. I think Josh Downs is probably better than most people realize, but just losing Pittman and the you'd be losing 100 catches and 1,000 yards based on the last 3 seasons. And I just think it's harder to know for sure that you're going to replace him than anybody else.
Yeah, it's very close to me between Taylor and Pittman. And I would say Pittman would be the toughest injury, even though on my list of most essential, I have Taylor one spot above. But again, like I mentioned, that also takes into consideration like what they can do when they hit their ceiling. And that to me is the difference between Taylor and Pittman is Taylor at his best is the best runner in football. And so we saw that in the Texans game. And there's this world where you pair that with Anthony Richardson. They're both humming. They're both, it's a very deceptive offense. That's what I think can be the Colts' edge over everybody else in this league is their run game, the diversity of their run game, the explosive, high caliber of it. And that's where Jonathan Taylor adds to that. But if you lose Jonathan Taylor, it could still be a very good run game. We saw them run pretty well late last season without either Richardson or Taylor, just based on their offensive line, based on the way they draw it up. Trey Sermon looks good in moments. Zach Moss was pretty good. Now the guys behind, like you said, behind Taylor are not as strong this year. So I do think, it's a world where if they were to lose, here's the thing though, if they were to lose Taylor, I mean, the pickings at running back right now are not good. I expect somebody to get cut, but I still would have more faith in them going out and signing somebody, maybe multiple somebodies, trading for somebody who could come in and do a little bit closer to what Zach Moss did last year. If they lost Michael Pittman Jr. for like the full season, I just don't know how they get anything at outside wide receiver that resembles a number one. And without that, I don't think on the outside, I'm not even sure you have a number two. I think you can argue Josh Downs is a number two in the slot, but I still think it's kind of dependent on like he really thrives when he's sort of getting that matchup in the slot, when he's getting away from the top, when it's single coverage, when he's getting away from sort of the attention of the defense. We saw that shift once he started to really produce late in the season. And then even though it's just one game, we saw one game without Michael Pittman last year, against the Falcons, and the Colts looked like they couldn't even operate at all whatsoever in the passing game. And I don't expect it to be that bad. Josh Downs is a year older. They added A.D. Mitchell. You'd like to think Jelani Woods will play some games this year. And quarterback, you've got Anthony Richardson or in worst case, Joe Flacco. And I think both are upgrades over Gardner Minshew. Still, it's hard to envision this being a good passing game if Pittman's just not there at all. And they have to go an entire year and try and replace, like you said, 100 catches, 1,000-some yards. For 3 straight years now, not only has Pittman led the Colts in receiving, but it's been like by tremendous amounts, like 300-plus yards a year. And it just goes to show that, like, even though teams know that's kind of all you have on the outside, the only thing established, at least high volume, he still finds a way to make it happen. And so if anybody else gets thrust into that role, if all of a sudden it's A.D. Mitchell or Alec Pierce that teams are putting their top cornerback on the outside, I just don't know how you feel like you can get a passing game out of that. And ultimately, if they don't get a passing game out of that, I think it's just going to change some things as far as what that run game can do. I think a big part of why I love the potential of their run game is the fact that you do have Pittman out there at wide receiver. It can't be just completely stack the box, completely disregard the perimeter and down the field, because Pittman will beat you on that, as we've seen. I think he's a very, very key element to this. So I think if they were to lose, I'll say this, if they were to lose Taylor for the year, I think they missed the playoffs, but very, very close, like last year probably. I think if they lose Pittman for the year, with Richardson still in somewhat of a rookie season, I think there's disaster potential. So I'm going to go with that. So we're in agreement there. Guess we can just move on to some other questions and see how many we get through.
Yep.
All right. From Daryl on Twitter, Daryl asks, what is more likely from Chris Ballard, adding a seasoned running back, cornerback, safety, or another position to start the season? So the way we're couching that is, say Chris Ballard is going to sign somebody of note. We know that that's not a guarantee, but for the purposes of this, we're going to say he's going to sign somebody of note. Do you think it's most likely a running back, a cornerback, a safety, or a different position?
I would like some information on who's going to get hurt next week.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be. I'm going to go corner. I know there are bigger names at safety, and I think there's also some lesser names that could fit and kind of stabilize things at safety. I think the chance for injury to create something maybe is more likely at corner. I don't know who they would sign at running back, really. The free agent running back lists I've seen are pretty sparse. So I'm going to go corner. I can see an argument for both of them. I just feel like by now you should have been able to get somebody if you were going at free safety. Whereas corner, I could see it being like, we're not sure where Flowers is, that kind of thing. Let's bring in a TJ Carey type.
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit. And because the wording of this tweet, which I'm seeing and you aren't, says seasoned, I'm going to say they sign a seasoned running back. That doesn't mean he's a good running back. As some of these running backs you get at the very end of their career, like Kenyon Drake was seasoned. So I think if we're talking about like a highly experienced player, I think they will get one at running back. I guess my thing about it is they are going to see if there's injuries are going to decide a lot of it. I'm assuming even if there's no injuries whatsoever, which there will be, but let's say the injury situations are equal at these three positions. I still think they're going to look at it at some point and say, we need another body in the running back room. And it's also the easiest to go out and get. I mean, those guys are sitting around waiting for you to call a lot of times. When you get into near training camp, they're fairly plug and play. There's just a little bit more faith in doing and throwing $1 million or $2 million at somebody and having them step in and do something for you. So I think, when they get out there and they look at how Evan Hull is coming back from, his missing a year, and they really, when they started to build out this run game and they realize like they want to run the ball a ton and they don't want to get to a situation where they're running a ton. Taylor's hurt for 3 weeks, and now you're becoming a passing team, at least to that degree. I think they want to build the pass off the run game. So I think that's more likely. I'm not saying I agree with it. If it was up to me, I would go out and sign a free safety right now when there's 2 Pro Bowlers on the market and they don't like the ones that they have. That seems like an easy, smart move. But like you said, if that was something they wanted to do, I mean, that probably would have happened weeks ago. It's, again, somebody is still going to sign Quandre Diggs and Justin Simmons, but this team specifically has had this need for so long and has not, that I can sense, gotten very close to doing either one of those moves. So I'm not ruling it out, but I just think it would be something would have to change, and I don't know what that something is. Maybe one more injury would do it, but that's true for just about any team out there. And I think what's more likely is another team has an injury and they are more willing to spend up to go get a safety than the Colts are based on what they've shown so far. So moving on from that, let's see. This is kind of building on the same thing, but I guess we'll just kind of throw it in there just so we can get to everybody. Ed Holinsky on Twitter asks, how's the Colts roster stocked and what might need to be added prior to training camp? So I'm going to you can play back my last answer. Free safety. Free safety is what they need. Honestly, I think if they went out and they signed Simmons or Diggs, I think this team all of a sudden you could talk about as why can't they win the AFC South? Why can't they make noise in the postseason when they beefed up their pass rush and they've addressed the weakest spot on their roster with a Pro Bowler who's also a big-time leader, communicator, kind of all the things that can tie their defense together. Then you sprinkle back in Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, make this a dominant run team. A lot of ifs as far as the health of their offense, but I think you could talk yourself into that. As it stands right now, I just don't think you can. I think you could talk yourself into the Colts making the playoffs. I just don't see how you could see them as a team that takes down the Bills or the Chiefs or the Bengals in a postseason game with the secondary they have going up against the receivers and quarterbacks in those matchups. So that position is easy to me. But is there anything else you think they need to add other than the obvious at free safety?
Well, I still think corner. I like Dallas Flowers is coming off of a torn Achilles tendon. And we've said this a bunch on this podcast, but usually guys coming off a torn Achilles tendon don't get their explosiveness back for a full year, like a full season. They can play for a full season, but they're not quite the same athlete. And a lot of what made Dallas Flowers attractive to the Colts as a starter last year was as an athlete. Now, in theory, you still have Jalen Jones and Juju Brents in that situation. But one of those guys is going to get hurt. Corners always get hurt. That's just the position. And or what if Kenny Moore gets hurt? It has not gone well. The two times he's been injured in his Colts career. I think he missed 5-ish games twice. Like they haven't really had anybody replace him, and they still don't. They did draft Micah Abraham. Maybe Micah Abraham is an actual Kenny Moore replacement who can back him up in the slot, but we don't know that yet. And so I think really one injury, especially to Moore, but one injury at that position, and it gets real thin real fast. I think that's the other thing with the secondary is that we're just talking about we've been talking a lot about adding on top, but if you lose Julian Blackmon or Kenny Moore, the way they're constructed right now, things get really difficult really fast.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about that at corner. If any one of those three gets hurt, really problematic because you have, unlike other positions, you need more than the number of starters you have. It's just the way it goes. Sometimes you play dime, sometimes you rotate. The Colts certainly don't have, I don't think, the players in the outside established to just play them every snap, even if they are out there. And also we've been conditioned so far to think of Juju Brents as a guy who's more likely to miss time than not miss any time. Cornerback, I thought going into the offseason they should have signed that. The reason I hammer it at this moment a little less than safety is just, number one, the Colts have told us they believe in those corners, even if maybe they should not, but maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't, but they do, and not at free safety. But number two is that the guys at the top end are just different at free safety. But looking at the list of corners, the same argument applies to a lesser degree. You could go out right now and sign either Xavier Howard or Steven Nelson, I think, and get a guy you feel like can be a number two corner who's highly experienced, Steven Nelson knows the AFC South. Xavier Howard is, played in the playoffs. These are and been a number one before. These are guys I think would be valuable for your room, but also they're guys that aren't going to be terrified when they get in the playoffs and they have to go up against Jamar Chase or Stephon Diggs, or Hollywood Brown or someone like that, and have to make the play. So that's, the same argument mostly applies there. And the thing it is really interesting, though, if they lose Kenny Moore and they don't have sort of your traffic cop for those two guys on the outside, not to mention what happens to your nickel spot, or you lose Juju Brents, and now Dallas Flowers is your full-time guy off the Achilles tear, and either Dallas Flowers or Jalen Jones is now your number one going up against Stephon Diggs or Jamar Chase. We saw some of that late last season when they were in that spot, and against Devontae Adams and Nico Collins, it was not pretty. It was not the type of secondary that made you feel like they were going to threaten somebody real in the postseason. So that is the spot where I think they almost have to eventually add somebody. I just don't see how they have the healthy cornerbacks, the durable, experienced cornerbacks to make it through 17 games plus in the postseason. It's also a position I think eventually they will. It's just I'm guessing, the way they normally go with this, it's probably a guy further down the list, a guy we probably don't know a ton about, or not as much on the radar. But
there's always one spot that Chris Ballard doesn't do anything at, or does minimal to help. And there are times that it is worked out for him, and there's times that it hasn't. And right now, I mean, he'll tell you in his press conferences about the times it did work out. Like he's been telling us that the corners are basically this year's version of Bernard Ryman and Will Fries. But they also might not be. They could also be this year's version of Matt Pryor and Danny Pinter. So
this year's version of the tight end room from that same year, I always thought that goes under the radar. That 2022 tight end room, when they have Jack Doyle retire, and they didn't have they felt like they didn't have the quarterback in place to sign the free agents, so they just moved everybody up and they drafted 2 rookies. And then Matt Ryan has thrived all his career with tight ends. They had none to throw to, and the blocking, that was a big part of why
blocking was huge. Yeah, they thought Jack Doyle was the best blocking tight end in the NFL because of all the different things that they could do with him. And like the run game, the way it was put to me was like if you think of Doyle as an essential part, which they did, that you downgraded significantly from a run blocking standpoint at 3 of the 6 positions on the offensive line, which is bad.
Yeah, it's bad. And I think part of why he does it, or Chris Ballard does it, and he leaves one position just intentionally young. Part of it, obviously, is he wants to bet on certain players at that spot, but also I think he wants to make sure that player gets the full runway. And so I think that's kind of happening at cornerback right now, where if you put a certain caliber of veteran, a guy that I'd like to have around, like a Steven Nelson, or maybe even something a little less than that, there's a chance that the coaching staff wants to just start him over Jalen Jones. And I don't think the Colts front office wants that because they feel like they've uncovered something in Jalen Jones, or at least they want to find out. That's kind of the tricky balance with all this. I really feel
this is the Moneyball philosophy. This is, we're going to trade Pena and everybody else, so Hatterberg has to play first base.
Yeah.
Which I think I've mentioned on this podcast before, but just in case I haven't, Carlos Pena became very good. The movie doesn't tell you that. Scott Hatterberg played like 1 more year, and Carlos Pena was very, very good.
Yeah, they left that the narrative. But yeah, and I've brought this up too. The reason I've always thought about this at corner specifically is when Gus Bradley and Ron Miles got here, Chris Ballard went out and signed one of their trusted veterans in Brandon Faison, and all of a sudden he was playing every snap to start the year over a more talented but younger player in Isaiah Rodgers. And yeah, this is what Moneyball. This is why I'm not going to give you Brandon Faison to play over Jalen Jones. You're just going to play Jalen Jones. And if it works out, everyone's happy. I mean,
if it works out, everyone's happy, and Chris Ballard gets to call us idiots again.
Yeah. So maybe he'll call us idiots. But what tends to happen when he takes these gambles is when it doesn't work out, it's not just like, oh, that missed the mark a little bit. It tends to totally blow up. That was the offensive line a couple of years ago, cornerback late last season. And like I said, that tight end room, when you throw in the blocking, I think it blew up just as badly as everything else we're talking about. So who knows? It could work. It could not work. But obviously, so those are the 2 obvious answers to what they need is what like we could have answered that question the day after the season ended, and their answer would be the exact same. It's cornerback and safety because they have literally added 0 veteran cornerbacks and safeties. So that's where we're at. Let's see here. This one I'm going to throw to you because this is not my wheelhouse based on me being at the track for the past month. Which undrafted free agent do you think will make the team if you had to pick one? And that question comes from someone called Forgotten Boy. Just to get the names in there. We got to give credit.
Oh, that's incredible. I feel very sorry for Forgotten Boy. Can we reach out? We need someone to reach out to Forgotten Boy.
Well, we're not forgetting him here. You're going to answer his question, and we're going to make him feel better.
I'm not going to answer his question, though. I feel bad. Because I think the answer is none of them.
You don't think a single one will?
I don't. There's not an easy path to the roster for really any of them. Short of Short of Matt Gay getting hurt and the Colts going with Spencer Schrader because he has the greatest preseason of all time, I just don't see maybe Craig Young. I'll go Craig Young at linebacker just because that's kind of a position where like you can sneak in with special teams. And there's some spots there that maybe are there for the taking. So I'll go Craig Young, but I just this roster is not built for undrafted free agents. It just isn't, and they don't have that many. So yeah, that's my answer. We'll go Craig Young, but my answer is I'm not really sure anybody is.
This is a really hard year for that type of player, just because this is what the Colts have traded down and picked so many players for so many years, and they do pretty well with that part of this operation. They get a lot of guys on day 2 and 3, and they add extra picks by trading down. That all of a sudden the roster, as they keep running it back, is pretty loaded, and they signed back everybody they could have lost basically from last year. That was a start that wasn't moving for to be a backup, a starter somewhere else. So it is very hard to make the team. I think I don't know a lot about Craig Young since I haven't been around, but I think that position makes sense. If someone's going to linebacker, the depth there is not super easy to visualize. It's Ronnie Harrison, sort of part-time linebacker, part-time safety. Jalen Carlisle, their 5th-round pick out of Missouri, is transitioning from a safety in college to a linebacker in the NFL. But we're going to see once we get into camp, like kind of how accelerated that is. He's going to make the team, I'm pretty sure, but is he, would you want more depth around him, or what exact fit does he have in that? And then, like you mentioned, special teams, their coverage unit, that was not a strength of the team last year. That part of the depth that could factor in on special teams needed some work. So it's a place where, like, if a guy does have a big camp, it's hard to make the roster, but at that spot, if you have a big camp on special teams as the linebacker, I think that can work for you. But
I think it's more likely that you see some developmental practice squad guys, Jason Bean, maybe Penix, like they end up on the practice squad. I don't see him making the initial 53.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll keep moving through these. Jason Sanders asks, what would be your top 3 potential players cut that would be realistic but a bit surprising? I'm going to be honest, I don't really love projecting cuts just because I just don't. We deal with these players and we get to know them, and I know fans would love that topic. So, if you go and then the other thing too is that the Colts I feel like they're just not as shrewd as other teams. They're not looking for ways to just move on from a player who's been there just to save the money if they can. Partly because their whole thing is they spend their money on their players, and that part of that is a bias to those players. So I think that they're, the guy that I'm sure that seems likely to people, or most likely for this kind of an answer, would be Mo Alley Cox, since he is getting a little bit up there. They've got a lot of tight ends, and they have, he's due something over $5 million, and you can, it's one of those contracts, if they want to move on from it, they can. But I don't know that I call that likely. Not as likely as other people think, because I think it's going to rely on. I don't know. Maybe they do have just one blocking role tight end, and it's between him and Drew Ogletree. That's kind of been hard to think through, as Drew Ogletree's had his offseason issues legally. So I don't think there's like obvious answers here to, as far as like, I guess that's part of the question is
Taven Bryan,
thick, but a bit surprising. So
Taven Bryan,
you're going to go Taven Bryan. Well, I'm a little surprised they brought Taven Bryan back to begin with.
That's why it's the first name that popped into my head. Like, if you start going through the number of defensive linemen they can keep, and also you factor in what you'd expect to be continued development from Adetomiwa Adebawore, it's just hard to get Taven Bryan on the roster. It's kind of hard to get Eric Johnson on the roster too.
Yeah, I thought about Eric Johnson. They just, they drafted him as the idea of something to develop, and hasn't quite happened yet. He's still young, and his body's been changing, but
we've reached Grover Stewart year. This is the year that Grover Stewart took off. So that's the only thing we have to do with Eric Johnson is
we're at that point where he's got a
caveat that he could make the leap. But Grover Stewart also didn't have to contend with Raekwon Davis, somebody like Raekwon Davis, or an investment like Raekwon Davis being on the roster at the time. He took a giant leap forward in his third season. And he also was the backup taking a job from Marcus Hunt, as opposed to Eric Johnson playing behind one of the best run stopping tackles in the league in Grover Stewart and a highly established player in Raekwon Davis.
Yeah, I think Raekwon Davis is obviously going to be on the team. He's also, I'm very interested in his skill set. When you look at his, like I said, got up close, got to meet him at Josh Downs' camp, and you see like he's the height of DeForest Buckner and the weight of Grover Stewart. And I think the reason they paid what they did to him is he's the backup for both. And so there's just not as many snaps to go around as before. And it's just going to be harder for guys to break through. And some of them, just the likelihood of Taven Bryan or Eric Johnson, frankly, breaking through when they haven't yet is not as high. One other guy I guess I'd throw in there is just something to, I guess, watch, think about. I don't know if this would count as surprising, but Danny Pinter, I wonder if he's for sure going to stick around, just because they drafted 2 interior linemen and 2 guys they think can play center. And if those back in Goncalves and Tanner Bornolini, if they step in and they look the part in camp, I mean, at some point it could be difficult to fit that many offensive linemen in. So I could see a guy who just plays center, since we've seen Danny Pinter is not really a fit at guard. He's also coming off losing a year to injury. We got to see him get back out there, but he's still kind of limited to one position, whereas those other 2 guys can play multiple positions. Their draft picks, their investments. That's one other one I could see.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a 3rd round pick and a 4th round pick. Like,
yeah,
I know Ballard cut Zach Banner his first year as a 4th rounder, but that was for work ethic issues, like really bad ones. And I just, it's very unlikely that those guys are in the Zach Banner situation is kind of an exception to the rule. I don't think it's likely that Bortolini or Gonzalez, based on everything we heard from the scouts, is in that boat where they might move on from them because of an issue with work ethic. So you don't cut 3rd and 4th round picks right away unless there's something like that. So yeah, I think Pinter, Sills, all those guys, there's not a lot of room on the roster for offensive linemen.
Yeah. And just looking through the list, if I had to pick what would be the one that's at least possible that I think would be the most surprising, I'd be very surprised this happened, but it's not impossible to me that they can move on from Kylan Granson. Only if, they got to see another big leap out of Will Mallory and feel like he is that specific fit in the offense. And then just feel like they're in that crunch at tight end where, Jelani Woods has to be healthy. You have to have everyone healthy for this to be on the table. But if you have Jelani Woods and you have Will Mallory, can be more of that F tight end, and then you want to keep, you're going to keep a blocker, either Mo Alley Cox or Drew Ogletree. Maybe there's a world where they could keep both. That one's not impossible, but I don't think it's likely because Granson is the most experienced. You'd have to say, as far as guys, I think Jelani Woods is by far the most talented pass catcher, but it's possible if he's got to get over the hamstring injuries and get to week 1. It's possible that going into week 1, there's a shot that Kylan Granson could still be the most, the pass catcher you believe in the most there. But it's at least not impossible because I do think, they liked a lot of what they saw at Mo Mallory, and it is a limited skill set to keep too many of that type of player. All right, finishing up with a the last few questions here come from Patrick. I guess we'll kind of go on that same line of thinking. Will the team go into the season with 5 tight ends on the 53-man roster? I'm going to say no.
I say no, and I say like injury at tight end has a way of making things easier, if it makes sense.
Yeah. If I had to guess, I think it'll be, and again, does Jelani Woods start the year on the 53-man roster? You certainly hope so. That's the plan. Same thing with other players. I mean, Drew Ogletree got hurt in training camp 2 years ago, and it changed that. But I would say, based on what we know as far as
it's a super physical position, which is why guys get hurt there so often.
Yeah, and a lot of players are young and getting used to that physicality. Based on, in terms of like, if there were to be no injuries going into it, I still don't think they're going to spend that many roster spots on that position. I think it's going to be Jelani Woods will make it for sure. Will Mallory will make it for sure. I think Kylan Granson's going to make it, and then one for the blocking role of either Mo Alley Cox or Drew Ogletree. So those pretty much it's 4. I think it's probably 4 spots for 5 guys, unless one gets hurt and then maybe he's on IR or something. Let's see. This other one kind of goes at other stuff we talked about, but will guys like Josh Sills, Jack Anderson, and Danny Pincher beat out the rookies for a spot on the 53-man roster?
Not unless those guys have some. Not unless Gonzalez and Bordolini have significant work ethic issues that we don't know about.
Yeah, in terms of beating them out, because like part of the reason I hedged on Pinner is just there's injuries are going to happen. It takes one injury to one of those rookies and he makes it.
Yeah, if they're on IR, then technically you beat them out. But
yeah, but truly beating them out, like, hey, we cut this guy because we wanted these. I don't see it for those 3. I don't. And it's not that they can't be better in camp, because they are veterans. They've got that leg up, but it's just they're not the investment. They're not the path forward. They're not.
We've also seen their upside in a way that you haven't seen with Gonzalez or Bordolini. Like with Freeland last year, it was like, okay, Freeland's not strong enough this year. We're going to have some issues if we play with him, but he might be strong enough in going forward. Like, whatever the issues are, they're going to want to see one more year of those guys. The 3rd and 4th. It's a 3rd and a 4th round pick. That's a significant investment.
There's pretty much no way they cut those guys. It's almost a 0% chance. Like you said, it would have to be like they just flat out did not bring it, did not fit, which also seems like the opposite of what they drafted them. Like they raved about those guys, setting a tone in the room and fitting and all this stuff that offensive line people love. So like these guys were not picks in like this is a total project and we got to like hope our coaches can get him right.
This isn't Jake Witt in the 7th round. Right.
Yeah. This is more like, hey, we're going to try and move their positions a little bit. It may take a little time to figure out exactly where like that guy fits in his turn, to figure out his future starting spot. But it seems like not that you don't know the head and heart of every player, even as much as these guys scout and say they do. But the risk level of those guys coming in and the reason holding them back being they're not working at it or they don't love football, that would be a shock. So
you also got to think when Zach Banner happened, that was very early in Ballard's tenure. This is a lot later. Yeah. They've had a lot of time to refine like how they find guys who fit what they want. I just don't see it.
Yeah, and I mean the one other thing you'd have to at least would be a possibility is if one of them got in trouble. So again, I wouldn't project that on anybody, but once in a great while it does happen with somebody.
Yeah.
But it would take something like that. I just don't see performance-wise.
And a third and fourth round picks are pretty. A 3rd round pick is a very significant investment. A 4th round pick is not far behind it.
And they traded up for the 4th round pick too. I mean, I'm not very far, but it just underscores that like those were guys they love. They really love those guys. They raved because to us it was kind of like. I know at least with like Matt Goncalves, just based on the numbers and what else they need, it was like a little bit of a surprising pick, but that underscores like it makes it even less likely, I think, that they would drop that guy. Is it wasn't a forced need, risky thing. It was more like we love this player that much, and we're just going to hold on to him and find a future spot for him. And they will make that work, I'm pretty sure. And the last question that's on here from Patrick is kind of goes to what we've beaten in the ground already. That's okay. It's over under 0.5 free agents signed between now and training camp.
Over.
I'm going to say over, but
because
your definition of free agent.
Right. The definition of free agent is very broad. That's where I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah. They will add somebody that will be a body in camp. Now, if you're asking me over under like guys who will make for free agents who will make the 53-man roster, that's interesting. I'm going to still say under, but because eventually I think what's going to happen is they will add somebody who will make the roster, but it will be something will happen first, an injury or a suspension, which tends to happen with this team, unfortunately, or someone else is just flat out not even ready, or someone gets surprisingly cut. They love to pick up the guys who get cut, but I don't think that like they will sign. I don't think they're going to sign somebody before camp who will make the 53-man roster. But maybe they will. Maybe they'll surprise us. Maybe they'll come through and do what we've been hinting at or suggesting and saying they sign Quandre Diggs or Justin Simmons. But I don't. If I had to guess, we're gambling here. A day before I go to Vegas, my bet is that they don't add one of those. So that's it for our mailbag, though. That's all the questions we have. It's a lot of stuff.
That's going to be it from the Colts Cover-2 podcast for this week. Next week, we will probably do it on Thursday, since we will have seen the mandatory minicamp by that point. And that will probably be our last podcast for the summer, as we go into the same break that the NFLPA no longer wants us to have.
Take it away.
Just real quick on that. I just can't see, like, it's one thing for the players. It's one thing for the play. I could see why maybe the players would be like, okay, well, we get a continuous thing. We don't have to come in. But these coaches and front office people and basically the entire staff that's not players, you're switching the start of camp to June essentially robs them of all of their downtime for the entire year.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you think about like the scouts, the front office people, I mean, they're grinding to the bone through the draft, which bleeds into the start of May. And they all of a sudden have to be there to evaluate the players in camp to then help, make, give input and decisions. I mean, maybe it's a little different for scouts, but front office people, anybody who is involved with any level of the front office who works here in Indianapolis.
Same thing with coaches.
Right there. And coaches too. And so coaches are now, maybe some coaches would be fine with that because some coaches don't understand work-life balance and don't want to, but they need it. I mean, their one chance to get a vacation is that period is July. There's a lot of coaches that's their only real time that they get away with family and their kids are out of school and all of that. So it's just like, maybe it doesn't go 100% to zero for those guys, but it gets close. And it's like the long break is it's just a huge part of making this whole thing work. Is like, it already feels like the NFL is this pretty year-round thing that just, with OTAs and the offseason program and what goes into the draft and the combine and the Senior Bowl and all this other stuff. It's like the one way that works is that they go completely dark for like a month plus, and then it kind of charges everybody back up for training camp. Which I would argue most players think training camp's too long. They don't sit here and go, oh, we really need another couple weeks of training camp. Like, they're veterans who are not like new to his team or new to a system. They're over it by like, I don't know, day 8. And so that's why you see a lot of players who are like getting up in their careers. If they don't have a big market, they're signing after camp because veterans hate training camp. And now it matters more for obviously for rookies and young players and rehabbing players, but like to what level? Like it already feels like the preseason's too long. They shortened that from 4 games to 3, but like there's not like that free week that's in there. The schedule, like, I don't know. That's just stop messing with it, please. But I'm never going to win that argument because I didn't think we needed 17 games, and now we're going to go to 18 games. So they just find a way to, like, if anything can get owners more money, and in this sport, it all seems to work that way. It does get them more money. It's just like the owners have the power. So
I don't think this does, though. That's the thing, is I don't think that this would. Because they're not advocating for a start to actual training camp where you have like fans in the stands. They're like advocating to start the ramp up in June. They're not going to open they're not going to open any money. No one's coming to watch these guys lift for 2 weeks at the start at the end of June. It's just not going to happen.
No, it makes you wonder why do we need a ramp up that's that long? I mean, I don't know if that's a response to, yes, there are injuries in training camp. There's going to be injuries anyway. It's like, it's a physical time. It's a lot of practices. It's like, that seems like something that a businessy person would come up with who doesn't know anything about football, which unfortunately describes a lot of the owners in this league. So I can see why.
This is the Players Association that came up with this.
Which is interesting because there's a lot of players speaking out about how terrible of an idea it is.
I know. I know. Yep.
So that doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know.
I'd also say as somebody who's a parent, because I've seen people be like, well, they just moved their off time to May. Yeah, kids are still in school, man. Like you're just moving an actual vacation to being at home while your kids are at school and doing nothing. Like, and you're doing nothing. Like, that might sound great to people who don't have kids, but if you have kids, like, you would like to have, especially in these jobs, I think, especially in these jobs where you frankly don't see your kids for like 6 days of the week during the season, you want to have that. I would assume that most people want to have that time.
Especially since like the biggest days for this sport are on the weekends. So it's Saturday's travel and Sunday is the game day. And
yeah, most head coaches see their families on Friday night, basically. And then maybe after the game on Sunday for a home game.
I covered a head coach once who only slept at home on Friday nights. It was the only time he went home. So that's what I'm saying. Coaches struggle with the work-life balance anyway. But I will say that coach took vacations in late June and July. So like you're trying to go from a little bit of time with family to zero. And for what? I don't know. I just don't see the benefit of this at all.
Yeah. I don't either.
I don't really want it either.
Somebody in the NFLPA does.
Apparently.
I don't want it at all.
No.
Selfishly, as somebody whose wife is a teacher, moving the break to the part of the year when she's still in school, not great. But I also think that's what a lot of people who are in the NFL would say. And like you said, a lot of players have already been like, "Who came up with this?" And it's like, "You guys did." Talk to your representative.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't yet have that dilemma with kids, but the thing that I think about is like when we got to week 1 last year, I felt like we already covered a full season. That's what training camp was, and that was a unique training camp. Anthony Richardson's first camp and the wildest contract standoff you'll ever see. But sometimes it gets long no matter what. I don't remember once coming out of training camp being like, wow, that flew by, took no time at all. And so just like, look, I love football, but that's why it was when we were drafting the schedule, I was grumbling about the late bye week. Like players don't like a bye week that's not the middle of the season. They're gassed by the time they need that to happen. So like, why do we keep making this all longer? Stop adding games and stop adding weeks to training camp that's already too long. It's a bad idea.
162 game NFL season.
Apparently it's just baseball now.
Games on every day of the week. ACLs are like pitchers' UCLs now.
Yeah, I mean, you'd fulfill a lot of dreams because anybody who's ever wanted to play football will get. There won't be enough people left. So all those fans in the couch who are like, I could do this. Well, you're going to get your shot if we keep expanding this. It may be painful.
This is a good ending because it illustrates why we're going to take a break here after the minicamp next week.
Yeah.
Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins. We will talk to you in a week, and then we will take our vacation and hope and pray that the NFLPA's suggestion doesn't get its way.